mind is generally going to be looking for the anima. So what Dunny is telling us 4 times, by telling us that she had a masculine mind, is he's telling us that Denise was the wrong woman for Boy. And that's the reason why he repeats himself that often. Normally a good writer like Davies is not going to repeat himself. But he says it 4 times. And he's making the point that this is the wrong woman for this man. Not only that, she's far smarter than him, as is proven by the fact that Boy thought he was pursuing Denise. In fact, Denise was calling all the shots. She had the whole game plan orchestrated, and Boy did not even begin to understand how brilliantly she was outmaneuvering him in this entire courtship that took place and led to their wedding. And she made Boy think that he was on the hunt. In fact, she had already captured her prey before he even knew. So there was a lot of interesting little aspects to this that were taking place. Continuing on with Denise, I'm going to take you to page 240. Move up a little bit. And we need to talk about this aspect of the psychological or the spiritual suicide of Boy that occurred prior to his actual killing. So if you take a look at the second paragraph, Dunny describing Denise says, she was a woman whose life and interests were entirely external. It was not that she was indifferent to things of the spirit. She sensed their existence and declared herself their enemy. Good point. She sensed the things of the spirit and declared herself their enemy. Now go to the bottom of 241 for a second. Well, Boy's been influenced by this, and he informs Dunny at the bottom of page 241 that he's now become an atheist. And in the second or third last paragraph, Dunny says, well, I'm not surprised. You created a God in your own image, you, and when you found out he was no good, you abolished him. It's quite a common form of psychological suicide. So as far back as page 241, we're getting the first, foreshadowing that Boy has committed psychological suicide, and that it's going to have been at the hands of his second wife, Denise. Now flip over to the next page, 242. Boy has been commenting disparagingly about Dunny's book and saying, why are you wasting all your time and your effort and your energy on this pseudo-spiritual, religious, mystical claptrap? Why don't you do something important for your life, with your life for a change? And so at the bottom of the first paragraph on 242, Boy says, I'm lucky to have Denise, but sometimes I wish I could get into a car and drive away from the whole damn thing. A little bit of foreshadowing there. And so Dunny says, well, don't bother reading my book. Let me tell you what it means. And he says, it's a mythological wish. He says, you want to pass into oblivion with your armor on, like King Arthur. Meaning, you don't want to get old. You don't want to go into an old folks' home. You don't want to be wearing diapers. You want to die in battle wearing your armor. And that's what happens. Quite shortly thereafter, he's dead. All right? So the next character we need to take a peek at is going to be moving on into the role of the soprano, which is perhaps a little bit trickier to deal with. But we have said that Mary is the goddess figure. She is divine mercy. She's the divine feminine. And he's the woman that he didn't know, because oddly enough, he seemed to have transferred her memory into his unconscious. I'll accept that for the sake of argument. So what happened in her case? His role in what happened to Mary killed his innocence. His childhood innocence was obliterated when he threw the snowball that caused her all the damage that it did. And he needed, as I said earlier, to make penance. But go to page 245 for a moment. And I want to, at this point, bring to your attention a key difference between Boy and Dunny, which is something we've been doing all the way through. Second or third paragraph down, Mary Dempster has died peacefully of an old age, sort of related cause, which took place. And Dunny has gone to the funeral home to visit the deceased and to pray by her coffin. And Dunny says, I looked at the small elderly woman. I prayed for the repose of the soul of Mary Dempster. Somewhere, somehow, unspecified, under the benevolence of some power, unidentified, but deeply felt. And it was the sort of prayer that supported all the arguments of Denise Staunton against religion. But I was in the grip of an impulsion that it would have been spiritual suicide to deny. So here's the discrepancy I want you to see, is that Dunny will not commit spiritual suicide by denying the spiritual feeling that he has when he looks at the corpse of Mary Dempster. Boy has already, unfortunately, taken his psychological or his spiritual suicide to the end by making a god of himself and then concluding that it just simply was not good enough. It didn't satisfy his deepest yearnings within. His heart and his soul were not satisfied. He had all the money, he had all the toys, he had the power, he had the women, he had all that stuff, but he didn't have peace of mind. So his life gave him everything it could, but it could not give him peace of mind. The next person I want to take a look at is, of course, going to be Magnus. And so the page that I'll bring you to in looking at Magnus is going to be page 255. And this will simply be to repeat a point that one of you guys made earlier. Second paragraph, halfway down the second paragraph. Paul, at Magnus Isengrim, has been at the Coburn College, and he's been doing a magic show, and he's been hypnotizing people and whatnot. But Paul Isengrim is now talking, and he's saying, nobody can be made to do anything under hypnotism that is contrary to his wishes, though of course people have wishes that they are unwilling to acknowledge even to themselves. So Paul is making what we're going to see as a really key point about hidden wishes that we may not be willing to acknowledge even to ourselves in some cases. Okay? And then finally, we're going to take it to Dunny, the confident executor, singing baritone as he works through this operatic rendering of this particular form of theater. And I'm going to go to page 237. We're going to jump back a little bit. And on page 237, in the first paragraph, Dunny is simply making the observation that as fifth business, he's always been the logical confidant of Boy, and that in fact, he never had to wring those confidences out of Boy. In fact, they were basically a river waiting to rush out. Boy had to tell Dunny these things. And he needed somebody he could trust, and somebody who was intelligent, and somebody who could be basically the safe repositor of all his deepest and most heartfelt secrets, except for the biggest one, which of course was the snowball. And that was the one that was never allowed to be brought up. Having done this, it's time to look at the cover. Because when you look at the cover, it has the answer to the question, who killed Boy Staunton, right before us. Because this particular entire rendering is of Boy Staunton. This is Boy Staunton that we were looking at in its entirety. All right? So he was killed by himself, first of all. So this is answering the question, who killed Boy Staunton? He killed himself. This is him. Next, he was killed by the woman he knew. Look for the lipstick on the lips of the femme fatale. So bottom left-hand side, this is going to be Denise. She was obviously one of the 5 people involved in the death of Boy Staunton. He was killed by the woman he didn't know. Take it to the blue-eyed corner in the top right. And that's going to be Mary Dempster. A slightly plainer, perhaps less evocative or provocative visage, but that's going to be Mary Dempster. Next, he was killed by the man who granted his inmost wish, and this is going to be a mustachioed magician on the bottom right-hand side. And finally, he was killed by his confidant. And to go back to that quote for a second, a little bit about his confidant. He was killed by the man who was the keeper of his conscience and the keeper of the stone. The keeper of his conscience and the keeper of his stone is going to be Dunny, with his wild eyebrows that he waggles about in the classroom, and he's already been informed of this by Boy during a previous conversation. That's how we know it's him. Keeper of his conscience and the keeper of the stone. So what did the stone symbolize? As a literary symbol, what is the stone?
Dunny's guilt?
Boy's guilt. It's Boy's guilt for the crime committed. Now, Dunny kept it because he himself felt guilty, but was that a acceptable guilt or was that a misplaced guilt? Right? I mean, the guilt should have fallen on Boy's head, and for whatever reason, Boy didn't accept it, so Dunny assumed it. But I agree. The stone definitely represented guilt. So having worked our way through the characters, I hope that we satisfactorily answered all these, questions that arose and tied up the loose threads and strings. And at this point, are there any questions that anyone wants to ask? Or is there anything that's still in your mind?
Does Keeper of the Stone have some, is it like a reference to something?
I've not run into it as an illusion. I mean, I'm reading it literally as the words stand themselves. Okay? Yes?
What is the niece being smarter than Boy to do? How long?
Because he thought he was pursuing her. She had already caught him. And she knew that. So he was too dumb. He was in a completely different league. As smart as he was, she was smarter. He was captured hook, line, and sinker without even knowing it.
The last line of the book, just the part from Elijah.
Okay, the very last line.
11.
Sorry about your illness, which was as much my fault as most things are anybody's fault. What was his illness?
He fainted in Peter.
He had a heart attack. When Liesel came up with that quote that we've just been going through, Dunny has a heart attack right in the Royal Alexandra Theatre, which is the theatre district on King Street, and he has to get taken out and he has to get brought to the hospital. And it's while he's in the hospital that he receives this letter from Liesel. And at this point, the entire theater company or magic show has already moved to where? They're in Switzerland, St. Gallen. They're in St. Gallen, which is where Carl Gustav Jung's clinic was located. And so Liesel is right in the heart of where Jungian psychology was formulated and where it was written about. And she's writing him from there, and she's saying, sorry about what happened, as it's my fault, I suppose, as much as anyone's, but I could not resist the temptation, and I beg you not to resist this one. Come to Switzerland and join the base in the Brazen Head, meaning join Magnus Isengrim and I. And we shall have some high old times before the five make an end of us all. So in our own lives, we are all the hero, we are all the main character in our own life's drama, in our own opera, and I'm singing tenor in my particular drama. And at some point, the main characters are going to all come together and they're going to watch my demise, and people will have played a different role in the play of my own life, as well as ultimately in the play of your lives as well. So that's what she's saying. But I like what she says, because she says, let's end off our plays together. She's saying to Dunny, she's saying, we are deep, deep friends, and let's not go our separate ways for the rest of our lives. Let's walk this walk together. Thank you for your attention. Okay.